Remember when every pub had a cloud of smoke hanging over the bar, and your granddad could tell a person's class by what they smoked? There was a time in Britain when cigarettes weren't just a habit, they were a cultural staple stitched into everything from wartime rations to bus stop gossip. Today, we're diving into the fog of memory to explore 10 cigarette brands that have vanished from British shelves, but never from the minds of true Brits. Whether you sneaked one behind the shed, nicked one from your uncle's packet, or simply remember the smell clinging to your coat after a night out, you're in for a proper blast of nostalgia. Let's light up these forgotten memories. Woodbine wasn't just a cigarette brand, it was a British institution. Launched in 1888 by Wills, this working-class icon became the unofficial smoke of the British soldier during both World Wars. Cheap, strong, and always available, Woodbines were synonymous with resilience and routine. Known affectionately as the poor man's cigarette, these unfiltered smokes delivered a harsh, powerful nicotine hit that left a mark not just on your lungs, but on your fingers. In the 1940s, 50s and 60s, a pack of 10 could be bought for less than a shilling, making them accessible to factory workers, dock workers, and teenagers alike. Though a filtered version was eventually introduced to keep up with changing tastes, the writing was on the wall. By 1988, the original Woodbine was discontinued. Health campaigns, the rise of filtered imports, and evolving preferences saw the brand fade into history. While tobacco, under the Woodbine name, still exists today, old Brit smokers will tell you the taste isn't the same. The original Woodbine represented an era when smoking was part of daily life, when a cigarette wasn't a vice, but a companion through hard times and harder work. Launched in 1965, Players No. 6 was the answer to Britain's growing demand for affordable cigarettes. It was a cheaper, filtered alternative to the more premium Players Navy Cut, and it exploded in popularity among young adults and working-class Brits. The No. 6 was instantly recognizable thanks to its distinctive blue and white packet, and it had a strong, full-bodied taste that wasn't too smooth but not harsh enough to put off new smokers. In the early 1970s, a pack of 20 would cost you around 20 to 25 pence, making it the go-to smoke for factory workers, lorry drivers, and teens trying their first cigarette behind the school bike sheds. The brand's fortunes changed dramatically in 1978 when tobacco taxation was harmonized with European Union standards. After the tax change, the price difference between Players No. 6 and upmarket brands like Benson and Hedges became almost negligible. 20 No. 6 cost 52 pence, while 20 Benson and Hedges cost just 57 pence. Overnight, sales tumbled. In the status-conscious 1980s, why smoke the cheap option when you could afford something with more prestige for just a few pence more? The brand quietly disappeared in 1993, remembered fondly as the people's cigarette, unpretentious, reliable, and always there when you needed it. There was no mistaking a Capstan full-strength cigarette. This brand was not for the faint-hearted. Unfiltered, full of flavour, and as strong as a miner's handshake, Capstan was originally produced by W.D. and H.O. Wills and had been around since the early 20th century. Its popularity really surged during and after World War II. These were the cigarettes your granddad smoked on the docks, or that sailors lit up after a long voyage. In the 1950s and 60s, Capstan Full Strength was ubiquitous in working-class communities, especially in port cities like Liverpool, Glasgow, and Bristol. The cigarette was short, stubby, and packed with high tar, high nicotine tobacco, one puff, and you'd feel it in your chest. When health warnings became more prominent in the 1970s and filtered cigarettes gained ground, Capstan's reputation as a rough smoke made it less appealing to new generations. It had the highest nicotine content and the second highest levels for tar. Eventually, production of the naval cut with the high levels of nicotine was tapered off. While tobacco under the Capstan brand remains on the market today, the design of the packets has lost their distinctive naval references. Ask anyone who smoked Capstan in its heyday, and they'll tell you it was the real deal, a cigarette that separated the men from the boys. In the world of British cigarettes, Embassy was royalty. Launched in the 1910s by Imperial Tobacco, it quickly carved out a reputation as one of the most reliable, broadly appealing brands on the market. It truly hit its peak during the 1960s, becoming Britain's top-selling brand from 1964 until 1970, when it was overtaken by Players No. 6. At its peak, Embassy had 24% of the market in 1968, and one of its catchiest slogans was, "Inhale to your heart's content." The Embassy packaging had a polished, formal aesthetic, while Embassy Gold was seen as a slightly more premium offering with a medium-bodied, relatively smooth taste. Embassy had a serious advertising budget with high-profile television sponsorships, billboards, and even a long-standing loyalty scheme. Collect enough Embassy coupons and you could order anything from a kettle to a bike. It was as much a lifestyle brand as it was a smoke. By the late 1980s, however, the brand began to fade, partly due to rising health awareness and a shift in taste. Embassy still exists today, but the Embassy Gold and Envoy variants that once ruled Britain have largely disappeared. If you remember trading in Embassy coupons or pulling a red and gold pack from a handbag or coat pocket, then you've truly earned your stripes. If most British cigarette brands of the mid-20th century were about grit and grunt, Consulate was style and sophistication. Marketed in the 1960s and 70s with the unforgettable slogan, "Cool as a mountain stream," Consulate had a light, minty taste thanks to its menthol core. It was very smooth on the throat, a feature that helped it win over women and new smokers who found harsher blends like Capstan or Woodbine too intense. The white and green packet gave it a clean, clinical look compared to the earthy or industrial branding of rival smokes. Consulate stood out as fresh, modern, and fashion-forward. Menthol was still a novelty at the time, and the marketing team did a great job of making it feel almost healthier. Price-wise, Consulate sat in the mid-range, not as cheap as Players No. 6, but not as pricey as something like Dunhill. A pack of 20 would typically cost around 35 to 40 pence in the mid-70s, putting it in reach of younger, trendier smokers. By the late 1980s, however, the menthol craze began to wane. It was more like a miniature fad that had run its course. After 2020, menthol cigarettes were completely banned in the United Kingdom, sealing Consulate's fate as a nostalgic memory of a time when smoking could be cool, refreshing, and marketed as if it were almost good for you. Launched in 1921, Craven A was named after the 3rd Earl of Craven and manufactured by Carreras Limited, quickly rising to become one of the most recognisable British cigarette brands in the first half of the 20th century. Craven A's defining feature was its smoothness. The filter version became particularly widespread and was seen as a less irritating alternative to harsher, unfiltered options. The brand used this to full marketing effect, running decades of advertising built around health-conscious messaging, ironic today but effective back then. The slogan "Will not affect your throat" became legendary. The red, white and black packaging gave it a bold yet polished look, and the brand was especially popular in the south of England, including London, Surrey and Kent. By the late 1980s, however, its dominance had started to fade, as newer brands with more modern marketing took over. The brand was sold off and eventually disappeared from most United Kingdom retailers. While Craven A may still be found in niche markets overseas, its British chapter has long since closed. Yet for many Brits of a certain age, the name Craven A still sparks vivid memories of a smoother smoke, vintage advertisements plastered on billboards and in magazines, and that unforgettable claim about not affecting your throat, a promise that seemed almost medicinal in an era before anyone really understood the dangers of smoking. Based on the formal name and regal packaging, Senior Service was known as a relatively expensive cigarette brand. These were filterless cigarettes owned and manufactured by Gallagher Group, a subsidiary of Japan Tobacco. The brand was named after the nickname of the Royal Navy. Launched in 1925 by J.A. Petraeus Limited and later taken over by Gallagher Group, this brand became a staple in Britain's smoking scene, especially in the 1950s to 70s. Senior Service was known for being unfiltered and being strong, with a bold, full-bodied flavour that hit the throat with force. While not quite as throat-rasping as Capstan, it was certainly in the same league, with high tar and nicotine levels. The branding leaned heavily on British naval tradition, complete with anchors and flags, evoking a sense of pride, duty, and masculinity. A pack of Senior Service in the early 1970s would cost around 50 pence, placing it in the mid to upper price range. It was seen as a premium option compared to other cigarettes. As filters became more popular, Senior Service tried to modernize with a filtered version, but the brand's image was too tied to a fading generation of smokers. By the early 2000s, it was discontinued. For those who remember it, Senior Service represented a particular kind of British masculinity, tough, traditional, and tied to the nation's seafaring heritage. Strand is a brand that will forever be remembered not for its popularity, but for its catastrophic failure in marketing. Launched in 1959 by Wills, Strand was meant to be sophisticated, urban, and cool. The famous advertising campaign featured a sharply dressed man wandering through London's empty streets at night, lighting up a Strand cigarette under moody jazz music. The voiceover whispered, "You're never alone with a Strand." Unfortunately, the public didn't see it that way. Instead of interpreting the advertisement as stylish or comforting, viewers saw it as depressing and lonely. The man didn't look cool, he looked isolated, like a noir anti-hero down on his luck. Despite huge spending on advertisements, the brand flopped spectacularly. It's estimated that only 0.3% of male smokers and 0.7% of female smokers ever bought a pack. This is a shame, really, because Strand cigarettes weren't actually bad. They had a medium-strength tobacco, leaning slightly towards the smoother end, and were designed to appeal to the new generation of thinking man smokers. Within a year or two, the cigarettes were pulled from shelves. It became a legendary case study in advertising failure, and the phrase "you're never alone with a Strand" became a kind of sarcastic cultural joke that marketing students still study today. Rothman's was one of those brands that managed to walk the tightrope between style and substance. In its heyday, particularly the 1960s through to the 80s, Rothman's King Size was seen as the cigarette of the refined working man. The old formula of Rothman's was distinctive, with a strong, slightly sweet flavour thanks to its carefully blended tobacco and well-balanced nicotine hit. Rothman's was also heavily associated with sports sponsorship, which gave the brand an aspirational feel. The packs were crisp, blue and white, exuding quiet confidence rather than flash. Unlike many budget brands, Rothman's weren't sold as a bargain. A 20-pack cost about 40 pence in the late 1970s, putting them on par with Embassy. While the Rothman's name still exists under British American Tobacco, the cigarettes sold today bear little resemblance to the old king-size formula that smokers remember. Changes to tobacco content, reduced tar and nicotine, and rebranding efforts have made it more generic and less distinguished. Those who smoked the original Rothman's King Size often look back fondly, remembering it as the perfect balance of taste, strength, and sophistication. It was a proper smoke for those who didn't want to compromise on quality, but also didn't want to appear pretentious. For many middle-class Brits, Rothman's represented aspiration without arrogance, quality without showiness. Camel cigarettes are more famously associated with American smokers, but they also had a pretty solid cult following in the United Kingdom throughout the 1960s to 80s, particularly among artists, intellectuals, and jazz aficionados who craved something a bit more exotic than typical British brands. Camel came unfiltered, and the pack's iconic camel and pyramids imagery added a mysterious, almost rebellious edge. In contrast to the blue-collar appeal of brands like Woodbine or No. 6, Camel felt worldly and sophisticated. The cigarettes weren't cheap because they were imported and priced higher than domestic brands, so they were rarely seen outside of more urban areas like London, Edinburgh, or Brighton. Those who did smoke them swore by the smoother draw and richer taste, which they believed made them feel like they were smoking something far more sophisticated than the average British cigarette. Camel did try to push its presence further in the United Kingdom during the 1980s with filtered versions, but it couldn't really keep up with more affordable homegrown brands. Today, while Camel still exists globally, it's largely vanished from British shelves, remembered mainly by those who once smoked them to stand out from the crowd. For a certain type of British smoker, Camel represented a connection to American culture, to beat poetry, to jazz clubs, and late-night conversations about art and philosophy. And that's it for today's trip down memory lane through the smoke-filled past of British cigarette culture. These 10 brands represented more than just tobacco wrapped in paper. They were markers of class, aspiration, rebellion, and identity in an era when smoking was woven into the fabric of daily life. While most of these cigarettes have vanished from shelves, they remain vivid in the memories of those who smoked them. A reminder of pubs filled with smoke, ashtrays on every table, and a Britain that no longer exists. If this video brought back memories of your first puff, your granddad's favourite smoke, or simply the smell of a different era, give it a like and subscribe for more nostalgia. Until next time, stay safe and remember those were different times.